You know, when you walk around Prescot, do you ever notice really simple things, like the fact that there are no straight lines? I just walked down Eccleston Street now, and it's not in a straight line. There's nothing straight about these streets of Prescot. All the streets around here are curved in some respect. They're not perfectly straight. So why aren't these straight? I mean, that's a thing. I mean, we've had hundreds of years to straighten out these streets, haven't we? But we seem to be creatures of habit. So these streets are all over the place, and the older parts of Prescot, the more hiddly-piddly than the more modern parts. And well, the reason for that is quite simple. We're stood here, which is Acres Street. You can see Acres Street there. That's a sign from the past. There used to be a street called Acres Street going down here. Well, there still is, but there's no houses on it now. But there were cottages on there, and I'll flash up an old photograph of what Acres Street looked like back in the day, and you can see how different it is to how it is now. Acres Street. It's an archaic name for acre. That's what acres is. It's an archaic name, and it's the acres. It marks the start of the acres, and this was the top corner of a place called Churchley Fields. Churchley Fields took over all of this area here. It was named after the town, because before Prescot became Prescot, it was known as Churchley. It's an old Anglo-Saxon name for a clearing with a church. Churchley, and the fields belonged to the church. That's why it's called Churchley Field. Prescot worked on a medieval farming system, and that's what this vlog is all about. It's about medieval farming, but I've split it into two. So in this part, we're going to have a walk around Churchley Fields, and I'm going to talk a bit about the history of Churchley and medieval farming. And the second part, I actually go to a place where farming is still practiced today in the same manner that Prescot used to practice it as well. So that's going to be a separate video, but it'll soon follow this one. So although Prescot was first mentioned in 1333, it didn't even get a mention in the Domesday book of 1086, or whenever the Domesday book was made, shortly after the Norman invasion. It didn't get a mention. But we know from facts on the ground that Prescot is much older than 1066. In fact, it probably dates from the time that the Romans left these islands in 450 AD, the 5th century. So the 5th century would be Anglo-Saxon, so Anglo-Saxons would come in, and it's definitely an Anglo-Saxon town. The possibility why it wasn't mentioned in the Domesday Book is because of various plagues, the Black Death, and various other things had depopulated the area. By the time they got up to the northwest, they didn't mention a lot of things that were going on in northwest Lancashire, possibly because it wasn't worth mentioning by that time. But Prescot must have been here. It's definitely Anglo-Saxon in origin. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around Churchley Field. I'm going to explain a bit about Churchley Field as we go. So come on, let's have a look. So there was a reference in the Court Leet rolls about a theatre being placed somewhere around here. It was the Elizabethan Theatre. If I can find that reference, I'll flash it up now. So it's on this corner. This was the start of Churchley Fields. Back then it would have been much different. It would have been more like just a trackway, just like a country lane. There would have been no houses on it. It would have just literally been a field, a farming field. So, I just want to show you this. This is Churchley Field, as it's shown on this map from 1592. You may remember I did the boundary walk using this map, and so this is the reference to that. There's Churchley Field. Where that dotted line is where Churchley Field is referenced. But I suspect that Churchley Field was all of this area here, going right up to the church, and that would have been all of Churchley Field. There would have been 3 major fields in Prescot. This was just one of them, and they would have been, there are signs here in 1592 of these medieval field boundaries, and they would have operated on the open field system of farming. So each person would have a strip of land, or farmers would have a number of strips of land actually, and they would farm them openly. What the open field system meant is that there were no boundaries. The boundaries were just a stone at each end. There were no physical boundaries, so no hedgerows and stuff like that. They were all it was just a field if you look at it, but there were strips, if you like, if you can imagine that. And they were farmed communally, which meant that everybody had to agree what was going in that field. So the field was split up into strips. It was usually on a north-south facing slope, which this is. This is a perfect slope. This is coming down on the hill of Prescot, but it goes down on Cypress Street there, and it's south-facing, perfect farmland for growing crops. Cypress Street, going down there, follows the boundary line, follows this boundary line here on Churchley Field. So that's the start of Churchley Field, and we're going down the top edge here. Yeah, let's have a look down there. This is really interesting to me because Churchley Field is basically where I grew up. Although when I grew up I didn't know it was a field back then. I didn't know anything about it, but I used to go to school on Churchley Field, which was the Beaconsfield Street School, by the way. And I used to live on Churchley Field. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, to know this kind of stuff. Now, Warrington Road here, it didn't exist. Warrington Road is basically, we've started at this point here and going down there. So Warrington Road does actually follow the medieval field boundary as it curves round to that point there. Soon we'll come up to Churchley Field Acre. Beaconsfield. That's a nod for the old Beaconsfield Street that isn't here anymore, and the school that used to be there. So we're at Horton Street now. Horton Street is basically the start of Churchley Field Acre. There, it goes down this street again. It follows that boundary line, the field boundary, the medieval field boundary. We're going to go on a bit further, which will take us round here and down Fells Acre there, and I'll show you where that is now. Okay, this point here. We've come to the top of Bond Street, which is here, and Bond Street again follows the medieval town field boundary, and we get to the bottom of Bond Street. This is only a short walk, by the way. It's not a massive walk. You could do this in a 20 minutes, probably half an hour, but you go down there, and then we'll go down Kemble Street and back up Cypress Street there. So let's go there. That's a lovely garden. Great to see that. So, as we go down the slope here, you can see how it's perfectly placed for catching the sun. Right, we've got to the old cobbles here of Bond Street. Right, this is where I grew up, and our old house used to be here. With these fences, our big old house, and this was obviously the Bath Springs, not the Bath Springs anymore, so I know these cobbles very well. Yeah, as I was saying, this map was made, or it's based on a map from 1592. Now in 1592 Prescot would have looked like this. That's what Prescot would have looked like. Very rural, as you can see. Fields, there are with some hedgerows here. There are indications of this, that there was open field system going on. And here, this was the turn of the century. This is how Prescot looked. It was kind of very rural, even in 1900. A lot of it hadn't been built on, and these old fields, well, they're medieval field lines, and this is how this would have looked. All of Kemble Street would have looked very much like this. So it's not fanciful, although we look at it today and we think it's very urban. It wasn't back then. So this is the corner, this is the bottom corner of Churchley Fields. They were known as peasants, medieval farmers known as peasants. Back in the day, it didn't have that derogatory term it has now. When you call somebody a peasant, it has it's a derogatory thing, isn't it? But back then, peasants simply meant farmers. They were farmers, and there were different classes of peasants, and there were some very rich peasants as well. But they would, as a society in Prescot, they would decide on exactly what would grow in Churchley Field. So they had to work closely together. And to do this, they formed something called a Court Leet. A Court Leet was a medieval court system made up of prominent 12 good men and true, honest men. And they were always men, and they would be prominent farmers, wealthy peasants, and they would decide the rules of operating this open field system. If they didn't get it right, if they weren't organised, then they would starve. The entire village, the entire town of Prescot could starve. Starvation was an ever-present thing. So everybody had to work together, otherwise they wouldn't live. They just wouldn't live. So Churchley Field would be part of a 3-field system. The 3 fields would be Churchley Field, there would be another field, I know there's Sletherford Field, and there's Low High Field, and various other fields. 3 fields, and they would rotate the crops. So it would be based on a summer sowing of probably wheat. Wheat was a very important crop, and a winter sowing of perhaps barley, and then one of the fields would be left fallow, and they would be rotated. The 3 fields would be rotated, and that would be on the basis of what the Court Leet decided. The Court Leet not only organised the open field system, they also policed it as well. So if one of the farmers farming a strip had overstepped the mark and ploughed too close to somebody else's strip, or taken a bit of that strip, then they would be fined. And so boundary disputes would be a part of the Court Leet's job. Not only that, but to clear ditches and to sort out drainage for the fields and stuff like that. The Court Leet was the overseeing body, and it paid them to get it right. They had to get it right because their lives depended upon it. So some of the crops that the the peasants would have grown on Churchley Field include oats, barley, wheat, rye, peas and vetch. And in the later medieval period, they would have used turnips as well. Turnips and vetch were feed for cattle and horses, beasts, basically, beasts of the field. They would have also kept cattle, horses, pigs, poultry and sheep. And all of these commodities would help them to not just to as food to eat, but also milk to make cheese and wool to make clothes. So everything was part of this farming system. This farming system actually is the thing that built Prescot. It actually, without it, Prescot wouldn't be here today. For hundreds of years, this farming system, for over 800 years, this medieval farming system not only laid down the lay of the land, the curve of the streets that we walk down, and the actual streets where they are. This farming system was a thing that grew into what we know it today. And it happened all around the country, not just in Prescot. And in the second video that I'm going to do, I'm going to show you, I actually go to a place in Nottingham where this farming system is still practiced today, just to do it justice and give you a bit more insight into how it works. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then give us a thumbs up and support the channel, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next video, the next part of this series on Churchley Fields. So thanks for watching. Bye.